Thanks for joining us again.
This is the first of 2 episodes where we look at what is perhaps a surprising way that ancient saints spoke of Heavenly Mother. The cloud of glory, the divine presence. In part 1, we look at several visions of the glory and explore how these relate to wisdom and the tree of life. In part 2, we show that this glory was rejected and lost, but prophesied to return. We then explore the 2 most notable visions of the divine glory in the era of the Restoration.
The scriptures contain numerous references to the visible appearance of the powerful and glorious presence of God as a bright cloud or a cloud of fire. Let's start with Exodus, which describes the glory of God enveloping and abiding on Mount Sinai.
When Moses ascended Mount Sinai, a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the 7th day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on the top of the mount. So God's glory is described as a cloud of fire.
The bright cloud was also the pillar that accompanied Israel in their wilderness journeys. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night.
Just as when God called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud that covered Sinai, Exodus portrays the Lord as being within the pillar of fire and cloud that accompanied Israel, looking out from it and speaking from within it. The Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud. As Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses.
There are certain times when this cloud of glory seems potentially dangerous, and at least once even Moses couldn't enter the tabernacle when it appeared. When the tabernacle was dedicated, then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle, and Moses was not able to enter into the tent of the congregation because the cloud abode thereon, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. The cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night.
The same thing happened many generations later at the dedication of the first temple in Jerusalem. When the priests were come out of the holy place, the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord had filled the house of the Lord. So, what is this glory of the Lord? We might naturally think, well, God's nature is so much greater than ours, that when God appears, of course, it is bright and glorious. That's just God's otherworldly nature. But ancient Christians and Jews thought of the glory of God not just as the radiance of God's being, but as a divine being in its own right.
The translators that produced the Targums, the Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible for Jews after the Babylonian captivity, they called this cloud of glory the Shekinah. Shekinah is a word that doesn't appear in the Old Testament, but it comes from the Hebrew word shakan, to dwell, a dwelling, or a tent even. And it referred to the divine presence, the presence of God on the earth. So while Deuteronomy 33:16 says that the blessings to Joseph's posterity came from him that dwelt in the bush, the Jerusalem Targum says that those blessings came from him who caused the glory of his Shekinah to dwell in the bush. Since the glory of God appeared in the tabernacle and the first temple, where the Hebrew Bible says, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them," the Targums say instead, "They shall build a sanctuary to my name, that I may make the glory of my Shekinah dwell among them." And when the glory filled the tabernacle so that Moses couldn't enter, it was this Shekinah. The glory of the Lord's Shekinah filled the tabernacle.
As we survey several prominent examples of visions of God's glory, we will see that these visions all center on a core of motifs. First, the bright cloud, and the things associated with clouds, thunder, wind, lightning, and rainbows, Next, since it is a bright cloud, there is fire or light, lamps, or burning coals. Finally, the throne of God, which as the ancient Israelites conceived of it, was a movable throne, a chariot. That throne was flanked by heavenly guardians, cherubim, and their wings seemed to make the mighty sound that accompanied the glory.
We mentioned the pillar of fire and cloud in the wilderness, and the cloud of fire that covered Mount Sinai. But notice that the Targums think of Moses' vision of the burning bush the same way, that God caused the glory of his Shekinah to dwell in the bush. The glory also appeared in the tabernacle and in the temple of Solomon, as we mentioned.
The Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies represented the throne of God. 1 Chronicles chapter 28 verse 18 called it the golden chariot of the cherubim, because the cherubim spread their wings and covered the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. This is the way ancient Israelites envisioned the throne of God, a chariot flanked by cherubim, and even propelled by their wings. This chariot throne was thought of as encircled in the cloud of glory. And he rode upon a cherub, and did fly, yea, he did fly upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his secret place. His pavilion round about him were dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. And the brightness that was before him, his thick clouds passed, hailstones and coals of fire. Other passages have similar imagery. O Lord my God, thou art very great, who maketh the clouds his chariot, who walketh upon the wings of the wind.
Ezekiel's great visions open with the appearance of the bright cloud of glory. As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the middle of the fire something like gleaming amber. This amber object is going to be shown to be the Lord, and Ezekiel will see his chariot throne, its wheels, etc. Ezekiel sees what is translated as living creatures, in the midst of whom there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and lightning issued from the fire. When the chariot throne moved, Ezekiel heard a great noise. I heard the sound of their wings like the sound of mighty waters, like the thunder of Shaddai, a sound of tumult like the sound of an army. Around it all was a rainbow, like the bow in a cloud on a rainy day. Such was the appearance of the splendor all around. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord.
Several old traditions tell of the bright cloud that attended the birth of Jesus. And they stood in the place of the cave, and behold, a luminous cloud overshadowed the cave. And the midwife said, My soul has been magnified this day, because my eyes have seen strange things, because salvation has been brought forth to Israel. And immediately the cloud disappeared out of the cave, and a great light shone in the cave, so that the eyes could not bear it. And in a little that light gradually decreased until the infant appeared, and went and took the breast from his mother Mary. And the midwife cried out and said, This is a great day to me, because I have seen this strange sight. Other related legends say that this luminous cloud transformed the cave into a temple. The cave was at that time made like a temple of the upper world. Thus, the glory appears in a temple, albeit a temporary one.
The glory of God appeared when Jesus was transfigured on the mount. And the gospel writers wanted to make sure their readers saw the parallel with Moses' experience on Mount Sinai. Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai. He called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. So in Matthew we read, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them. And from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. So the Mount of Transfiguration became a temporary temple, like Mount Sinai. The fact that the disciples wanted to build 3 skene, or dwellings, tents, tabernacles, further alerts us that this is a temple-related event where the glory appeared. A heavenly voice spoke from the cloud just as it did out of the pillar of fire or the burning bush. And we should not think of this cloud as gloomy and dark. Matthew notes that it was bright, and the Greek word here is photene, filled with light, or even composed with light, which corresponds well with a pillar of cloud and fire in the wilderness.
Latter-day Saints naturally think of the voice from the cloud as that of the Father. After all, it is specifically the Father that speaks those same words to Joseph Smith in the Sacred Grove as he introduces Jesus. But since early Christians considered the voice from heaven at Jesus' baptism to be that of his mother, as in the Gospel of the Hebrews, the voice from the cloud at the Transfiguration is worth examining more closely. The Gospel accounts do not say whose voice it was, but Peter gives us more information in one of his epistles. He wrote of his experience with Jesus on the Mount. He received honor and glory from God the Father when that voice was conveyed to him by the majestic glory, saying, "This is my Son, my beloved, with whom I am well pleased." Peter says that the words of approval were those of the Father, but they were conveyed or carried to Jesus by the majestic glory, suggesting that both heavenly parents spoke those words of approval to Jesus.
In Ezekiel's vision, at the heart of the bright cloud of glory was a lamp or lamps, out of which flashed lightning. There was the sound of great wind, like that of a storm, and the bright cloud also made a rainbow. It's the same in Revelation. "And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper, and like a sardine stone. And there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. And out of the throne proceeded lightnings, and thunderings, and voices. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God." When John saw the future temple, the New Jerusalem, he said, "The city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God is its light."
The New Testament does not specifically say that the bright cloud of glory was present at Pentecost, but the imagery is the same. "Suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance." These tongues of fire have provoked curiosity, but understood within the ancient imagery of the Bible, it is evident that the disciples became like branches of the menorah, each with its burning olive lamp on top. The menorah was a symbolic tree of life. The children of the tree of life were described as branches, the branch being Jesus Christ.
If we credit Jewish legend, encounters with the glory did not end after the New Testament. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was an important rabbi just after the time of Jesus. The Talmud says that he and a student were traveling, and the student asked him about the nature of the chariot throne of Ezekiel's vision. Immediately Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai alighted from the donkey and wrapped his head in his cloak in a manner of reverence, and sat on a stone under an olive tree. Rabbi Elazar said to him, "My teacher, for what reason did you alight from the donkey?" He said, "Is it possible that while you are expounding the design of the divine chariot, and the Shekinah is with us, and the ministering angels are accompanying us, that I should ride on a donkey?" Immediately Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, his student, began to discuss the design of the divine chariot and expounded, "And fire descended from heaven and encircled all the trees in the field, and all the trees began reciting song. When the Shekinah appeared, the grove was filled with fire. There is a temple reference here too. The place became a temporary Eden, the original earthly temple. The olive tree stands in for the tree of life in the center of Eden, and the other trees around it became like the other trees of the garden, which in legend sang. As one ancient Jewish text says, when the Blessed Holy One comes to the righteous in the Garden of Eden, all the trees in the Garden of Eden scatter their spices and rejoice and praise.
Or in 1 Chronicles 16:33, then shall the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord. And even Isaiah 55:12, where all the trees of the field shall clap their hands at the return of paradise to the earth. So this vision of the Shekinah occurs in a temple setting, the most common way the glory appears.
Another tradition from the same section of the Talmud also describes the appearance of the glory. Two rabbis began talking about the chariot throne of God. That was the day of the summer solstice, when there are no clouds in the sky. Yet the heavens became filled with clouds, and there was the appearance of a kind of rainbow in a cloud. And ministering angels gathered and came to listen, like people gathering and coming to see the rejoicing of a bridegroom and bride. So the cloud on a bright day and a rainbow and a host of angels appear in response to their scripture study about the chariot throne. Now, whether or not these visions actually happened is immaterial. The early rabbis had the same symbolism, the same mental picture of the glory, the Shekinah, as the early Christians.
So did later Jewish mystics. In 3rd Enoch, we see the memory of the same kind of vision of the glory of God. It says the Prince of the Presence, which is the Messiah according to Dr. Andrei Orloff, is glorified by 1,000 hosts, exalted by 10,000 armies. His stature is full of burning coals. The opening of his mouth is like a lamp of fire. His tongue is a consuming fire. His eyebrows are like unto the splendor of the lightning. And the bow of the Shekinah is between his shoulders. And the bow, of course, is the rainbow.
Visions of the glory are not confined to ancient history. Numerous accounts describe visions of the glory at the dedication of the Kirtland Temple. In his dedicatory prayer, Joseph Smith had prayed, "Let thy house be filled as with a rushing mighty wind with thy glory."
Oliver Cowdery and many others recorded the fulfillment of that prayer. The Spirit was poured out, and I saw the glory of God like a great cloud come down and rest upon the house, and fill the same like a mighty rushing wind. I also saw cloven tongues, like as of fire, rest upon many, while they spake with other tongues and prophesied.
Warren Parrish, acting as Joseph's scribe on that day, recorded the following similar account. The Lord poured out his Spirit upon the congregation, as the brethren began to confess their faults one to another, and tears flowed from our eyes, and some of our hearts were too big for utterance. The gift of tongues came upon us like the rushing mighty wind, and my soul was filled with the glory of God.
According to Eliza Snow, in the days preceding the dedication, the prophet's father, Joseph Smith Sr., prayed frequently that the Spirit of the Most High might be poured out as it was at Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. When it came, he was greatly surprised and exclaimed, "What? Is the house on fire?" Perhaps those outside the temple at the time could see the fire-like glory even more clearly. The people of the neighborhood came running together, hearing an unusual sound within, and seeing a bright light like a pillar of fire resting upon the temple.
Having shown examples of visions of the Shekinah, the glory of God, through scriptural history, we'll next show that anciently this glory was understood to be Lady Wisdom herself. Wisdom guided Israel along a marvelous way and became a shelter to them by day and a starry flame through the night. She brought them over the Red Sea and led them through deep waters. So in this passage, wisdom is the pillar of cloud and fire in the wilderness. Likewise, in Ben Sira, when wisdom praises herself in the assembly of the Most High, she opens her mouth, and in the presence of his hosts she tells of her glory. She says, I dwelt in the highest heavens, and my throne was in the pillar of cloud.
In this same passage from Ben Sira, wisdom shows that she is the Shekinah, the divine presence, by using multiple references to dwelling, tents, and so forth. These are highlighted here. The passage begins in the divine council. I dwelt in the highest heavens, and my throne was in a pillar of cloud. Among all these I sought a resting place. In whose territory should I abide? Then the Creator of all things gave me a command, and my Creator chose the place for my tent. He said, Make your dwelling in Jacob, and in Israel receive your inheritance. Before the ages, in the beginning, he created me, and for all the ages I shall not cease to be. In the holy tent I ministered before him, and so I was established in Zion. Thus, in the beloved city he gave me a resting place, and in Jerusalem was my domain.
Multiple tent or dwelling phrases occur in quick succession here. The place for my tent, make your dwelling or encampment. In the holy tent I ministered, meaning the glory that filled the tabernacle. These phrases are based on the Hebrew word shakan, dwelling. And this wordplay between shakan and wisdom is meant to establish that wisdom is the Shekinah, a word based on this same Hebrew root.
In Matthew's account of the Transfiguration, we read of Jesus that his face shone like the sun. And this points us to Moses, who, when he came down the mount from speaking with the Lord, did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. And Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses. The skin of his face was shining, and they were afraid to come near him. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face.
The effect of the glory on the beholder can sometimes be a shining face. And the book of Ecclesiastes tells us, who is like the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? Wisdom makes one's face shine.
Wisdom was the glory, and wisdom was also symbolized as the tree of life. So in Ben Sira, all this symbolism gets mingled together. Happy is the person who meditates on wisdom and reasons intelligently, who reflects in his heart on her ways and ponders her secrets, pursuing her like a hunter and lying in wait on her paths, who peers through her windows and listens at her doors, who camps near her house and fastens his tent peg to her walls, who pitches his tent near her and so occupies an excellent lodging place, who places his children under her shelter and lodges under her boughs, who is sheltered by her from the heat and dwells in the midst of her glory.
We have first the wordplay between ashrei, happy, and wisdom, reminding us that wisdom was ashratah. Since wisdom is the tree of life, her ways, her paths, are the way of the tree of life. The disciple should not only pitch his tent near her, but he should lodge under her boughs. Next, she is portrayed as shelter, shelter for the disciples' children, shelter from the heat. And this refers to the pillar of cloud and fire in the wilderness. Wisdom of Solomon said that wisdom became a shelter to them by day and a starry flame through the night. Finally, the disciple can dwell within her glory. Now, the Hebrew version of Sirah, found in an old synagogue treasury in Cairo, ensures that we know that wisdom is the Shekinah. It says the seeker of wisdom will dwell in her habitations, where the word is shakan, tent. In fact, each of these highlighted words refer to shakan. Thus, wisdom is the tree of life, the pillar of cloud, the Shekinah.
Since the glory could be spoken of as the tree of life, the rabbis understood that the menorah represented the Shekinah. Perhaps the candelabrum is lit for illumination? To this God would respond, do I need its light? Rather, evidently, the illumination of the candelabra is testimony to all of humanity that the Shekinah rests among the Jewish people. The sacred incense of the temple was symbolically the essence of the tree of life. Therefore, it was used ritually to create the cloud of glory around God's throne within the temple. Aaron shall take a censer full of coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of crushed sweet incense, And he shall bring it inside the curtain, and put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat that is upon the covenant, or he will die. The Aaronic priests had to make this cloud of smoke, or they would die. Why? To stand in the presence of God was considered lethal, and this idea occurs in Restoration Scripture too. See, for example, Doctrine and Covenants 84, 21 and 22. But the clearest example of this is from the Pearl of Great Price. Moses was caught up into an exceedingly high mountain, and he saw God face to face, and he talked with him, and the glory of God was upon Moses. Therefore, Moses could endure his presence. This is why the priests that Moses ordained made a cloud of smoke with incense, the symbolic essence of the tree of life. It was to be a symbol of the protection afforded by the glory.
Moses 1 also equates the glory of God with the divine presence, the Shekinah, and the presence of God withdrew from Moses, that his glory was not upon Moses, and Moses was left unto himself. This account also ensures that we understand that Moses' experience was the same as Jesus on the mount. His glory was upon me, and I beheld his face, for I was transfigured before him.
The Apostle Paul taught the Corinthians, "Our ancestors were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea." That is, they were baptized by the water or dew of the cloud of glory that accompanied them. A legend preserved in the Zohar says that this dew baptism fulfilled the same kind of function as baptism in the restored church today. Individuals were not only cleansed of sin, but became part of the church community and received the gospel covenant. When Israel drew near to Mount Sinai, that dew that descends from the supernal point came down in its fullness and purified them, so that their filth left them, and they became attached to the Holy King and the community of Israel and received the Torah. So, the cloud of glory could function as the waters of life.
We have reviewed some visions of the divine glory, and we've explained the origin of the other name for the glory, Shekinah. And now we've shown that the glory bears all the same symbolism of Lady Wisdom that we've discussed in previous segments: the tree of life, the menorah, the incense, the waters of life. The glory was understood to be Lady Wisdom. And just as Lady Wisdom was rejected, we will next explore the loss of the glory and her prophesied return. So, join us for that in part 2.